Hello, I'm Rosie, and this is my biannual Bibliothon wrap-up video. For the biannual Bibliothon, I read 6 books and finished 5. So as things go, I'd say that's pretty good. And I actually managed to read a grand total of 1,794 pages, which is a lot. So I'm just really happy with how the week went, although it did end on a very slow day where I only actually read 12 pages, but overall, I managed to kind of complete all the reading challenges. So I'm going to talk about each of the books and tell you a bit about what I thought of them. The first book I read was for the group challenge, which was to read Paper Towns. I am not entirely sure how much I enjoyed this book. It was a pleasant read and it took a while for me to get actually into the story. It did get quite slow in parts. There were moments where I just thought, come on, get on with it, and I will admit I was disappointed by how it ended. It was building up to something that fell very flat. The characters were interesting, like Margot was an interesting character. There was all this whole mystery about her, but I couldn't quite picture her as a real person. Her story is really mysterious and quite enigmatic, but when it got to the end, it was kind of like, oh, you couldn't quite grasp her, and I don't think she would translate that well into real life. Be interesting how well she's portrayed in the movie coming out. Q, on the other hand, I felt was quite entertaining. You could relate to him as a person, although he did go slightly over the top at times. His friends were so unrealistic that while Radar was okay, Ben was just like, I did not like him at all. His use of honey bunny to describe women just put me off him completely. So it was a bit of a mix, I have to say. I think I gave it about 3, maybe 3.5 stars as a rating. It's not one of John Green's best. It was kind of a disappointment really, because I really enjoyed The Fault in Our Stars. I then read Dante, The Divine Comedy. This was my did not finish book, and it was such a struggle. Like, I was just not in the mood to read this book at all. The trouble is, the language is so complicated that you have to actually think about it and try and decipher what's going on, and it's written in verse, which I don't think I've ever read verse, so there was that added complication as well. And there's so much name dropping of people who existed in Dante's time, but I have no idea who they are. Like, there's the odd person I recognised from my history and art history lessons, but otherwise it was just like these whole segments about these characters who I had no connection to. They were just name dropped there. I'm quite glad I read it, but I did not gain anything from it that I could not have gained from looking up a summary on the internet, which is just really disappointing. I think if you are interested in reading this, it's probably a book that you need to have a lot of time for, perseverance, and it helps if you studied Italian history. But I really struggle with this, so I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. As a reward for finishing Dante, I read Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, which was as amazing as it always is. I've read this book so many times, and it was just so nice to be back at Hogwarts again and reliving Harry Potter's adventures, because I'm doing a reread this summer, and this is of course 5 out of 5 stars. I could go on about this forever, so I'm just going to leave it there. It's just amazing. I'm so glad I included it in my TBR for this Bibliothon, because I don't think I would have made it otherwise. After 2 not very good books, this was a relief. I then read Child 44. After Harry Potter, all my reading took a step up a notch. This book was fantastic. I think I read it in 2 days. It was brilliant. It's terrifying, it's gruesome, mystery is fantastic, and it gives you kind of an insight into Soviet era life. I don't know how accurate it is in terms of Soviet era history, but from my experience of visiting Soviet era buildings like the old KGB headquarters, it was quite similar in that regard to how I felt during those visits. So it was really interesting seeing the connection between my own experiences of being in the places that are described in this novel, which just made it even more terrifying. This is another 5 out of 5 stars. I just really enjoyed it. I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, but I'm just so glad I bought it. This was my book set in a foreign country novel, because I've got to say that earlier, and Harry Potter was my reread favourite childhood novel. And then for 2 of the challenges I decided to double up. Those challenges were a companion novel, novella or prequel, and a social issue that you care about. For those 2 challenges I decided to read Hope and Other Luxuries by Claire B. Dunkel. This falls into companion novel because it's a kind of a companion novel to Elena Vanishing, written by Elena Dunkel and Claire B. Dunkel, which tells of Elena's battle with anorexia from Elena's point of view. This novel explores that same battle but from the mother's point of view, and it's really interesting seeing the different perspectives and how an inner battle can't really be perceived on the outside. This is my social issue because mental health is really important to me, and eating disorder is, I think, probably the most deadliest of mental health disorders. So it was really interesting reading about this disorder and seeing how it affects the family. What I really liked about this was how Claire also explored the other daughter's struggle with depression and her own battle with depression, and how it's translated into her writing and her own life experiences. And I really enjoyed this book. I would give it another 5 stars, but I'm going to give it 4.5 because there were sections that didn't seem quite so relevant to me. Like, I found myself skimming over parts of the book that I didn't feel quite related that well, and it is a long book that I felt could have maybe been shortened a bit. There were really minor things that does take it down like a half a star, but on the whole this is a really good book. My last challenge was to read a book from a genre that I have read the least of this year. Originally I was going to read Sisters of Treason, which is a historical novel. However, I only had a day to read and that day was very busy, so I decided not to read that book because I just wouldn't have been able to finish it, and instead went for a short story from Grimm's Fairy Tales because I've never read Grimm's Fairy Tales or any of older versions of the fairy tales. I've just read retellings this year. From this big book I read the introduction and the first story, which was The Frog Prince, the original version of The Princess and the Frog. And it's a really short story. I was expecting something a bit longer and more fleshed out because this was quite concise, and it didn't seem to have that much of a moral. It was really interesting to read it, and I would recommend, like, if you do have any kind of these books, just read them and try and compare them to the versions that you know, because the story I read in this is nothing like Princess and the Frog, which I saw as a Disney film, and the story that I read when I was younger. I'm looking forward to reading more of these in the future, because this was a short story and it's part of a large, massive collection. I'm a bit hesitant to rate it, but I think I'll give it around 3.5, 4 stars. Reading, I was like, oh, it's over already? It was too short, I think. But I guess if you're basing it off, these were stories written down from retellings, spoken by mouth, so they're not going to be long and complicated. These are the books that I read for the biennial bibliothon of summer 2015. This pile is quite heavy, so I'm going to put these down. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Goodbye!